Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Sustainable Tallahassee's Green Drinks. This is for the month of July. For those of you who are new to this program, this is something that we do every month as a way to connect to the community and provide an educational opportunity to learn something about environmental and sustainability topics. Normally, we do these as an in-person event at a local restaurant or a local bar, but these days we're online, and so we thank you for joining us. We have a great program tonight. We have Salome Garcia, the Policy and Campaigns Manager from the CLEO Institute, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the kind of work that she does and the work that CLEO does. We are very thankful to have Salo on our board of directors. She has been a huge asset to Sustainable Tallahassee. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring Salo in. Hi, Salo.
Hi, Mike. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for joining us tonight. So can you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So like Mike said, do you hear a little bit of an echo?
You're good.
Oh, okay. So like Mike said, my name is Salome. I am the Policy and Campaigns Manager for the CLEO Institute. And without giving too much away, because the first part of my presentation is going to be a little bit about my personal story, I just moved to Tallahassee about a year ago to open up the CLEO Institute's Tallahassee office. And I tend to work on all of our policy campaigns in the climate and energy field, but really specifically focusing on the concept of resiliency as it impacts our frontline communities and our Black and Brown communities that are facing poverty, which are usually disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. Do you want me to go on and
sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about your work there and what the kind of things that you do.
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about intersectional environmentalism throughout the next 15 to 20 minutes. But before I start talking about intersectional environmentalism and kind of some of the things that we are seeing in the climate movement, I wanted to kind of get a little vulnerable and tell people my own personal story and kind of how I got to this field. So I moved from Bogota, Colombia at the age of 6, and we moved to Miami. And when I moved to Miami from Colombia, I was way ignorant about all of the challenges that my mother faced to bring me here and all of the new opportunities that being here would provide me. So I grew up in Hialeah, Florida. So for those of you that don't know, Hialeah is located in Miami, and it is actually one of the lowest income immigrant communities in the country. And so really quickly, and for anybody that's grown up in a community facing poverty, you will know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that very quickly we understood the importance and the beauty of helping your neighbor. Most in my area, my mom worked 3 jobs to support me and my little sister. And I got a job with my mom first at the age of 10 and quickly up until the age of 13 and a little after, I worked in my mom's cantina business. Basically, she would make food and then I would deliver the food with my little sister, who at the time was 1 to 3 years old, to all of the friendly local businesses in our area. And at the time, I was really too young to understand how our language, our culture, and really more than anything else, our legal status impacted our ability to eat, or the ability to have a roof over our heads, or the ability for us to find a job. And so I like to talk a little bit about the challenges that we faced obtaining our legal status, because a lot of people tend to think that you kind of just apply to get your legal status and then you get it and you're done. But the reality is a lot different than that. The thousands of dollars that we needed in order to even apply for legal status meant that my mom had to go thousands and thousands of dollars in debt. We had to crowd surf, borrow money from friends and families, and friendly neighborhoods, friendly neighbors, friendly businesses. And while we were able to apply for legal status by getting that, $25,000 in debt, a lot of my friends who were also pursuing citizenship never saw their applications progress. And after years of working with my mom in her cantina business, we finally were granted legal status and a work permit. And when we got that work permit, I was able to get a job. So I got my first official job at like the age of 15, and I worked at GameStop and Hot Topic and Things Remembered, and I was working 40, 50 hours a week from the time when I was 16, all the time until I entered college. And it was when I entered college that I started volunteering as an intern, and then got my first paid internship with the Climate Reality Project and Next Gen Climate at the time, now Next Gen America. And we were talking a lot about climate change and what this means. And I noticed two things when I started working in the environmental movement. The first thing I noticed is that none of the materials were in Spanish. So even though my mom wanted to help me and my mom wanted to understand what we were talking about, she couldn't get it unless I translated it to her. And the second thing I noticed is that my mom, like many other in our area, we did not have time to think about penguins and ice cubes and things happening very far away because we were worried about putting food on the table. My mom was worried about getting my little sister to school, and I was working a lot of other jobs, and more than anything else, I just wanted to get a good internship on my resume and make some money. But as I started to realize that these issues actually mattered and that a lot of people didn't have the ability to understand the content, I took it upon myself to start translating all the materials, and I created an organization in my undergrad at FIU called the Age of Aquarius, where I would organize with my friends, single woman, head of household, and little kid field trips to the Keys, all in Spanish, where we can teach these people like why it's so important to like conserve the environment and why it's so beautiful that we live in Florida. And this was a great opportunity for people that have lived in Miami for literal years and years, but had never made it 30 minutes to the beach because they didn't have transportation, because they didn't have the time. And so I quickly became recognized as FIU's climate activist, organizing in Spanish-speaking communities. And I was recognized at the national level. So they flew me out to Washington, D.C. I was able to meet President Obama, and I was able to sit at a roundtable discussion with then EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy to just like listen and discuss with American Campuses Acting on Climate was the name of the roundtable. And I remember very vividly thinking that I was the only woman of color in the room. I was the youngest person in the room, and that a lot of the like breakthrough solutions to the climate crisis that people were speaking about wouldn't really be realistic for my mom, and they wouldn't be a realistic solution for the people that I grew up with. And then that really struck me because I began to realize that while frontline communities were in these conversations, oftentimes we were just like abstract group of people, like frontline communities, like low-income communities, and that's not what we were, right? Like I'm a real person, and my mom was a real person, and I started thinking through how we needed to uplift frontline community members to be at these tables and to talk about how these solutions can be accessible and realistic to the communities that we aim to serve. And so with the Black Lives Matter movement and people talking about diversity and inclusivity, this term started to come up a lot in the climate and environmental movement called intersectional environmentalism. And I've been thinking a lot about what diversity and inclusivity and intersectionality mean to me. And the first thing that it means to me is beauty. I think that our movement as environmentalists and as the climate movement, we are so much stronger when we exemplify and uplift our diversity in perspective, our diversity in experience, in languages, in countries that we come from. And so I'm going to now share my screen, and I'm now going to start my presentation to talk a little bit more about like intersectional environmentalism and what exactly that means. So I'm going to share. Oh, is it already sharing?
Yeah, so I have to add it here for you. So Salo, before we do that, is there any chance, do you have like a headset or a microphone or something like that? I guess we are getting more video than I realized.
Yeah, I can put these on. Okay. Does it work now? Can you guys hear me better?
Actually, yeah, that sounds a lot better.
Okay. Awesome. That sounds great.
There you go. I'm going to go ahead and back myself out.
Okay. Can you guys see the screen and still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So this is a presentation about intersectional environmentalism. And so first, a little bit about the organization I work for. So we are the CLEO Institute. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan educational organization, and we work in collaboration with some organizations and institutions that you might have heard of, NASA, the CDC, the World Health Organization. And we really work to simplify and communicate the science, impacts, and solutions of the climate crisis. Even though I had this passion my entire life to work on, inclusivity and equity and equitable solutions to the climate crisis, it wasn't until I began working for the CLEO Institute that I was really able to put like pedal to the metal and start working on the things that really bring me passion and joy. That's me. I was supposed to introduce myself in this slide, but I already did that, so I'm just going to skip it. So a little bit about intersectional environmentalism. So intersectional environmentalism is really putting and prioritizing not only the planet, but people on the planet. It's an intersectional view of environmentalism that brings to light the injustices that minority communities and Black and Brown communities in poverty often face. And it brings it to light on the injustices that people and the planet face and how the both are interconnected. The interconnected of both frontline communities and the earth actually is so beautiful because we can find solutions that actually address multiple injustices and multiple fronts. And most importantly, to me, it recognizes the social inequality that is at the root of a lot of problems in our society. One of the cool things about intersectional environmentalism is that at the root, you really see that injustices to our planet, we're not feeling them equally at all. Not only when we talk about the United States, but when we talk about specific countries, you are seeing pollution, you're seeing health inequality, health like disproportionately like diseases, kind of more in one country, more in certain countries than the others, and here in Florida, more in certain communities than the others. So in intersectional environmentalism, we're really talking about the communities that are impacted the most and that contribute to it the least. Specifically in Tallahassee, I'm going to talk a little bit about the proximity to landfills, industrial plants, railroads, and increased risk of exposure to pollutants. So I'm sure that if you're here from Tallahassee and know a little bit about the history of Tallahassee, this is not stuff that's super unfamiliar to you. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about access to quality food. One of the things that really gets me the most is extreme heat, because people often think of justice as something completely separate, but extreme heat is not a stranger to us, especially if you live in Florida. So something that people don't know about Tallahassee is that right now in Tallahassee, we face something that we call a danger day. A danger day is when the heat index is above 105 degrees. When the heat index is above 105 degrees, that means that it feels like it's 105 or more. It is actually physically dangerous for firefighters to be outside, turning on a fire, football players to be outside with a sport, farm workers to be out in the field collecting our food, kids to be playing sports outside. If you become prone to having heat stress, to having a heat stroke, to suffering from dehydration. And here only in Tallahassee, which is arguably one of the cooler cities in the state, we are on course to have 50 days per year with a heat index of over 105, making it a danger zone by 2036. So we're not even talking 2050. We also have higher risks of vector-borne diseases. So a vector-borne disease is anything that comes from like mosquitoes or a vector. So diseases like like Zika, like Lyme disease, because we have these vectors that are able to survive longer. And here in Tallahassee, I just recently found out we have a lot of ticks. So Lyme disease is something that is, that we need to keep at the top of our minds. And also something that I think is very, very important to talk about when discussing inequality and climate justice is that there is correlations between extreme heat and spikes in domestic violence abuse, in gun violence, and just in general violence in a neighborhood. It's interesting when you talk about extreme heat and neighborhoods that are in poverty, because oftentimes one of the easiest ways to spot a low-income neighborhood in Florida is that it does not have a lot of tree canopy. So imagine you're living in a household, and this is another fun fact for you. In the state of Florida or in any surrounding county in Florida, there is no law that makes mandatory air conditioning units inside of public housing or low-income housing units. So you're in a low-income neighborhood, so you're already having economic and financial trouble, and there's no air conditioning unit in your house. You have to walk to get public transportation. That is already a hassle to take public transportation to get to work because we don't have the best public transportation system in the majority of cities in Florida. So, and then you come home again to a hot household. So because these stress levels are so high right now, there are actually like really amazing studies that are actually correlating domestic violence and other types of like domestic abuse and violence in general in the hottest cities and in the hottest neighborhoods in hot cities. Another thing that we talk a lot in Tallahassee is food deserts and the lack of access to food. So here in Tallahassee, that's like a really big topic because in the south side of Tallahassee and in a lot of unincorporated Leon County, we see that there is a lot of food insecurity. And just for people that aren't familiar with the term food deserts, there's a difference between having access to healthy food, like here in Midtown. I live in Midtown and I have like Publix and a Whole Foods and like a bunch of different things within walking distance. But if you are in a city and a food place is longer than 3 miles walking distance, it's 1 to 3 miles walking distance, then you are in a food insecure area because you have to walk in the middle of the city with like little to no tree canopy and no public transportation for longer than is reasonable to get all your groceries. In the south side, we have a food swamp, and in unincorporated Leon County, we have many food deserts. A food swamp is somewhere where you don't have access to a lot of clean, healthy produce, but your only access to food is gas stations or fast food places. That's a food swamp. A food desert is that you have no access to food within a mile or more. And surprise, surprise, food deserts actually impact low-income communities of color the most. This is a picture that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is Andrew Gillum, at the time mayor of Tallahassee, talking about Hurricane Michael. And Hurricane Michael devastated a lot of communities around Tallahassee. And so here in Tallahassee, we had to open up our doors and our help and our arms to climate refugees that lost their homes and their businesses and everything in nearby cities and had to migrate here to Tallahassee. But also right here in Tallahassee, we also had flooding in a lot of areas, and the power went out in a lot of areas, many for weeks. And then finally, pollution. So this might not surprise any of you, but we are disproportionately impacted by pollution in low-income Black and Brown communities, not only in Tallahassee, but also in many other places. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about pollution after the presentation. But there are a lot of amazing solutions. So the CLEO Institute, we are working very hard to uplift grassroots organizations that have been working with frontline communities, organizations like the Oasis for Women and Girls, and many others. Specifically, we love working with faith institutions and faith congregations around the south side of Tallahassee, because we think that one of the most important things that we can do is uplift community need through resources to small businesses, through jobs for people in low-income communities. So I would recommend that if you want to see like, how do I get solutions? One is continue to listen and educate yourself. And two is vote. Vote for a change. Local elections are coming. I am, for one, like a huge fan of local elections because there are a lot of nonpartisan positions in local elections, such as judges, sheriffs, district attorneys. Those can make some of the biggest differences at the local level. And also, of course, your state and federal elections are coming up as well. So making sure that you're prioritizing elected officials that have the interests of frontline communities at heart. So these are the solutions. Listen, be open-minded, encourage dialogue. And for a lot of people here, like me, that we have a lot of privilege, we have a house to live in, we have money to pay our utility bills, we have money to be able to donate to nonprofits, definitely using our privilege to encourage dialogue and see how we can be helpful. And lastly, educate. Share information on social media, attend lectures, seminars to keep yourself educated. Definitely education around how frontline communities are disproportionately impacted is like a long marathon. It's not a sprint. You know, as somebody that like grew up in a frontline community, like I'm still learning. I'm not an expert on like frontline community allyship. I'm not an expert in intersectional environmentalism, but it's one of my passions. It's something that I keep seeking information on. And read more, right? I recommend books by Angela Davis. I just really got into some of the books that she's published, and they're absolutely amazing. I already talked about the importance of voting, but again, cannot be said enough. I think that the voter registration deadline for local elections just passed, but the voting deadline for local elections is around the corner. I don't exactly know when, but if you want to follow Florida conservation voters, they'll keep you updated on all of your voting information. And get involved. There are a lot of local organizations around Tallahassee and Leon County that are doing really incredible things. So the FAMU Community Garden, Food Pantry, Second Harvest, and Frenchtown Farmers Market, and Project Food are all organizations that are directly focused on decreasing food insecurity in the area. So I keep saying last but not least, I'll be honest with you, I have no idea how many slides I have left, but I'm thinking this is like the last one or second to last one. One of my favorite solutions is to advocate and making sure that frontline community members are not a group that you are advocating for, but making sure that frontline communities, that people that are facing the brunt of these issues are right there with you, and making sure that you're doing everything in your power to bring people to the table that have historically not been at the table. Research politicians, attend climate strikes when they continue, and then call your local and state representatives to advocate for people. And then these are some of the ways that you can get involved with the CLEO Institute. We do have a website, it's cleoinstitute.org, and then you can click on the Tallahassee tab to look at all of the incredible stuff that we're doing in this area. Alrighty, that was pretty much my presentation.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. That was really, really enlightening. A lot of great content there. And so, folks, I encourage you, if you have questions or if there's anything that you'd like to talk about, please feel free to put it in the comment section here, and I'll read it out to Salo as we go. So one of the things that, one of the things that I was thinking of is, if we were talking on one of your first slides there, was the idea that injustices to the planet are not being felt equally in all communities. And you had a bullet point there about some of the ways that that's felt, one of them being proximity to railroads. And that actually reminded me of a fun fact, if you want to call it that. So everybody's heard of the saying of the wrong side of the tracks, right? But you know why is it the wrong side of the tracks? Why is it always that on one side of the tracks is a worse neighborhood? And it actually is an environmental reason. It goes back to the very early days of railroads, when it was steam engines and they put out a lot of smoke. And the smoke primarily blew to one side of the tracks with the wind, and that was a less desirable neighborhood. And that ended up being almost exclusively the community of color in that city. And so you can see how far back that idea goes, that it really is ingrained even in the geography and the structure of communities. And that you can see that that's, there are modern day parallels to that as well. Communities that are nearby to highways are disproportionately affected by pollution. That's one of the things that we see. And I'm sorry, I'm talking too much here, but this was top of mind when I saw it. One of the things that we're seeing today is that communities that are in closer proximity to highways have lower respiratory health and are more susceptible to COVID, and have worse complications from this respiratory disease. And so you may not necessarily make that direct connection, but it really is there, and it's ingrained in so many different ways.
Have you ever heard of Smoky Hollow?
Yeah, the neighborhood in Tallahassee.
Yeah, so I have a fun story, and it's not credit for me. I actually had my interns, Sabrina, Hugh, and Charlotte, who are our Gen CLEO leaders. They're 2 high school students in the area. I had them do like a 1-pager on environmental racism in Tallahassee, just out of curiosity, because we've been talking a lot about it. And one of the students, Charlotte, gave me a presentation and a 1-pager on Smoky Hollow, and I'm going to share a little bit of what she shared with me, because it honestly blew my mind. And she was basically talking about how the intersection of racism and environmental issues in North Florida goes back to, first of all, its early plantation days, because enslaved people were forced to overwork the land through extensive monoculture farming and like all of these different practices. And these like inadequate food resources and pollution from transportation and healthcare for Black families in Tallahassee like still continue today in certain parts. And so one of the really interesting examples of this was Smoky Hollow. So Smoky Hollow was, like, as you mentioned, it was a neighborhood in Tallahassee established in 1890. So it really goes quite far back. And it was between the Florida Capitol and now what is Railroad Square. And the reason it was called Smoky Hollow was because of the constant smoke from cooking fires in residents' homes. So people would cook, that like smoke or whatever from the fire would go up, and then through the early 20th century, this community like was thriving and it began to expand. They, made their own churches and like their own like schools and cafes and stores, and like farming in the community, provided like fruits and vegetables. And then in the 1960s, Florida lawmakers began to kind of think of a downtown Tallahassee, and there was like some controversy and like a special referendum, but basically they began to expand, and 500 Smoky Hollow residents had to leave and migrate to other areas like Bond and Frenchtown and now what is known as the South Side. So really the Smoky Hollow community was completely eradicated, and this like kind of situation helped Tallahassee's progress. But that space where families like lived and played now is kind of was used as like a parking lot and a dump. And so one of the that I found that so impactful because like now we see a couple of different examples. And specifically, we know that there was a power plant in 1921 constructed at the edge of Smoky Hollow. And that was intended to like replace one that had burned down before. But all of those fumes from that power plant had like a huge air pollution problem around them. So much so, then like a few decades later in 1986, the site had to close down from toxic pollution. And it kind of fell into disrepair and condemned. But people, like, it took decades to realize that, like you mentioned, that air pollution was causing respiratory illnesses for literal Tallahassee residents that were making a life there. And now that site is known as Cascades Park. So fun fact, that is a little bit of the history of Cascades Park. And so that's really what we call climate gentrification or like pollution gentrification. But I know that a lot of people don't know the history of Cascades Park, so I thought it'd be interesting to bring up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is one of the things. If you go to Cascades Park and you take a look around, it's a beautiful place. It's an absolutely amazing park. And that power plant that you're talking of is that restaurant that's there, the Edison.
Wow, see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's to put it in a little bit more perspective, Cascades Park actually, prior to being Cascades Park, was an EPA Superfund site. That's how bad it was. It was that bad pollution, and it was, you're right next door to where this neighborhood was. And then it's also right there, again, it's right next to the railroad tracks like we were talking about a minute ago. And so you can see how, those neighborhoods were primarily in polluted areas that then got bulldozed in the name of progress for the community. And so it's just, it's
something I think about a lot. It's like we want progress, right? Like we want the city to be beautiful, and we want to like see new pretty restaurants, and we want like places to go play and sit around in cafes, and I think about that a lot because I don't have the answer to it, right? But I definitely think that affordable housing and inclusivity in that development process needs to be kind of uplifted more as we continue to develop and progress as a city.
Yeah, and on that same line too is that one of the things that I think we often forget about is that buildings in particular that are more sustainable, more efficient are also cheaper. They're also cheap. And so if you can do things like put in solar panels on a building that generates their own electricity so the residents don't have to pay a utility bill every month, or they have energy efficient appliances so they pay less in their utilities, or they have hot water heaters that don't use as much electricity, or even to your point about food deserts, if they have access to healthy quality food in their neighborhood, they don't have to travel as far and spend that money on gas or public transit or something like that, and they're healthier in the first place. So there's it all goes back to that triple bottom line of sustainability of economic, environmental, and social. Sorry. So there is a great question here in the comments that I'd really like to hear your thoughts on, Salo. How does one convince others who are focused on their everyday, day-to-day struggles to step up and advocate for their community?
Oh my God, that was such a beautiful question. Thank you. Yeah, it's hard. That's one of the reasons why I love the work I do, because it's so important to contextualize the climate crisis as something that is like more than penguins and ice cubes. I I am not a conservationist. Like I love trees and I love butterflies, but like that's not really what gets me moving. And it's important to remember that if you're struggling to put food on the table, that's what you're thinking about is like the today. The climate crisis, like we mentioned, and like Mike and I have been talking about, impacts everybody's today. And it's finding how that specific family is getting impacted. Is that extreme heat in their neighborhoods? Is that food insecurity for not being able to access low, cheap, quality food? Is that public transportation? Like, are they able to get to work or their kids to school easily and effectively? Is that an energy burden? Are they just paying a lot for their energy bills? Finding out what and going to where people are at. So often environmental and climate organizations fall into the trap of just using the same message for everyone and then expecting people to like meet us where we're at. Like we're doing this meeting at 5 p.m. at this place and everybody come, and like that's sometimes not enough. And there's not a one fits all answer. That's the answer, is that like we need to transform the message based on the people rather than get the people that fit our message. But I would recommend just like talking to them, figuring out like what pulls at their heartstrings, what are you struggling with, and then contextualizing that within a reason to act for climate movement.
Yeah, great points. So one of the things you had mentioned there just a second ago is the idea that we've always looked at these things as if they're far off problems, right? They're going to be a thing that happens in 2100 or in 2050 or something like that. But you had a point earlier on in your presentation there about the city of Tallahassee can expect 50 days of 105 degrees plus by 2036. And I know for some people who perhaps time has not quite caught up to them yet, 2036 still might sound like a long way off, but that's actually as far away from today as 2004 was. I remember 2004, 16 years ago. You know, for everybody on the call here, right? That's Bush v. Kerry. You know, that's what was going on. That same time span is how long before we can expect 50 plus days of 105 degrees. These problems are coming soon. It is soon now. It is not a far off future that we will not experience. And I think that idea of meeting people where they are and understanding exactly not just how is climate impacting or climate change impacting the world or even the community, how is it impacting you? How is it impacting your family? And what can we do to help you? That's a really great way to frame it and a really powerful way to make change. So a couple of other comments in the thread here. We have one. Kara Fleischer is working on a citywide project to monitor air quality. Kara, great name in environmentalism in the Tallahassee area. Hope to connect with her on that and learn more about it in the future. A tribute to the Smoky Hollow houses on the north side of the park. That's if you've ever been on Franklin Boulevard there by the overpass. It's the steel beam frame house. That's what that is. It's a tribute to the Smoky Hollow neighborhood. And then question, how can we advocate with our local governments to build energy efficient, affordable housing using taxpayer dollars?
Wow, that's a great question too. I'm like simultaneously really happy and also like electrified by living in Tallahassee, because in some ways, Tallahassee is definitely one of those leaders. We recently passed, as many of you already know, a commitment to 100% renewable energy. And not only is the city of Tallahassee passed that resolution, but they've taken a step further than a lot of other municipalities that have passed a resolution, where they're actually in conversations with local nonprofit organizations like the Tally 100 Coalition, like members of Sustainable Tallahassee, where they're actually in open conversations on how we can make sure that this transition is equitable. So I think, and my motto is always like stronger together. I would join Tally 100. Tally 100 is literally filled with multiple nonprofit organizations that are like getting their heads together, that are meeting on a weekly basis, and that have experts from different industries. I'm not an expert on affordable housing, on how much that would cost, for example, but there are experts. Some are members of Sustainable Tallahassee that are in Tally 100 and that have researched this for literal decades, and that can talk to the city's contractor that is in charge of that request for proposal and on that transition, and provide feedback, provide recommendations, literally provide other recommendations of like how to make this an equitable transition, including of energy efficiency and affordable housing units. I will tell you that, like, with the city of Tallahassee, as it stands right now, we'll see in the future, but as of now, we don't need to do rallies and like do public outcry, because they're there. They're open to listening. They're open to hearing from the public. So what we need to do is just make sure that we're collaborating with the right nonprofits and that we're providing those recommendations through the proper channels, and make sure that like they are included in that final process. Tally 100, there's a Facebook page and you can find all about meetings there.
I could not have said that better myself. That is excellent. So I think that also answers one of the other questions that I see come up here is, part of that process is understanding what elected body has what authority over what projects. And so making sure that your message is being directed at the right people at the right time in the right way to make change. I think that we are very fortunate, like you said, to be living in a community where we don't have to have rallies, where our elected officials are responsive to what we desire and what we hope for. And if we did not, I think the way to do that is, like you said, is to vote. Vote for candidates that share your beliefs. I think in this particular instance too, it's vote for candidates who share that passion for intersectionality between people and planet, not just focusing on one over the other. It's really important to understand the interplay between those two things and how they impact each other, and how working on one project can work on, or one issue rather, can work on the other one as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to say something that's like not super popular, but it deserves to be said. Reaching frontline communities and communities that are disproportionately impacted and that need to be at the table is more expensive, more time consuming, more energy consuming. And that's why a lot of people don't do it. Because if we wanted to do 100% as quickly as humanly possible, we would leave a lot of people behind. And that is why we need to put our heart where our mind is. Like, if we are not advocating for a sustainable world for all, then what are we really advocating for? So we just need to find the people that are willing to go the extra step.
I am going to leave it on that, seeing no other questions. I think, Sal, that's an excellent way to end this conversation. Folks, if you have any, I'm sorry, I see one. Yeah, let's leave it on that. Sal, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Your contact information, I believe, is on the slides. If not, it's on Sustainable Tallahassee's website. As always, you can reach us at admin@sustainabletallahassee.org or right here on Facebook. Any questions, please feel free to reach out. And folks, we will see you in August for our next Green Drinks.
Oh, I also wanted to say that I do have a Greening Our Community article on this topic coming out in 2 weeks. So if you're interested in finding out more, make sure you check out this column for Greening Our Community on August 15th.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, take care. Good night.
Bye.